I relied on the division history, and it had a mistake.
Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If I can ask you to please take your seats and find your cell phones. Make sure they don't interrupt tonight's program.
History's
I'm Jeremy Collins, the Director of Conferences and Symposia here at the National World War II Museum's Jenny Craig Institute for the Study of War and Democracy.
You want to give your shout out?
It's great to have you here for our latest edition of our Meet the Author series. Before we begin, as many of you know, we have a tradition. I'd like to go through some folks that are always special to us. If there are any World War II veterans, home front workers, or Holocaust survivors in the audience here, or if they're watching at home, please stand and be recognized. And if they're not here, let's recognize them anyways. Any veterans or active duty members of our nation's military, please wave, stand, and be recognized.
A few of them.
And those who keep the home fires burning, any family members of veterans or active duty, please be recognized for what you do for your service member and for our country. Thank you. Any Patriot Circle members, charter members, any of you who help us bring programs like this together, who help us build all these buildings, please wave your hand or stand and be recognized for your support to the National World War II Museum. Thank you. And then a special shout out tonight, members of the Society of the 1st Infantry Division who have called New Orleans home for this week and this annual convention. We're delighted to have you here. First ID members, please wave, stand. Thank you for coming to New Orleans. Tonight we're excited to have a friend of the museum's back with us, Greg Fontenot, who many of you probably saw in December of 2019. He is here to talk about his new book. Back then he talked about loss and redemption at St. Vith, but he is here to talk about No Sacrifice Too Great, the 1st Infantry Division in World War II. Greg is a retired colonel in the United States Army and currently works as an Army consultant and historian. He received an MA in European History from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a second MA in Military Arts and Science from the United States Army School of Advanced Military Studies. He was the lead author of On Point, the United States Army in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and has authored other titles including Loss and Redemption at St. Vith, the 7th Armored Division in the Battle of the Bulge, and the 1st Infantry Division and the United States Army Transformed, Road to Victory in Desert Storm, 1971 to 1991, which won the 2017 Army Historical Foundation Award for Unit History. Interviewing Greg tonight will be the Executive Director of the Jenny Craig Institute, Dr. Michael Bell. Mike is a West Point grad, combat veteran, historian with a PhD in American history from the University of Maryland, and a proud and former member of the 1st Infantry Division. He's a strategist who has served at every level from platoon through theater army, as well as with the U.S. Central Command at the Joint Staff, the West Point faculty, and the National Defense University. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Bell and Gregory Fontenot.
Yeah, me up first.
We're good. So we're honored to have Greg with us this evening, and I think you wanted to start out with a shout out to some of your comrades.
Yeah, I'd like to do a roast of Al Turner, but you just said shout out, so we won't do that. I'd like to recognize some battle buddies, some folks I went to war with or went to the Cold War with in a couple of cases. Dave and Laura Gross. Dave commanded 3rd Battalion, 37th Armor in Desert Storm, retired as a Brigadier General, and he too, I'm a migrant to Kansas, but he is a native Kansan in all kinds of ways. Al and Joyce Turner. Al Turner and I and Russ Honore were majors together in the 1st Infantry Division. Al was the Reforger Plans Officer, I was the Division Plans Officer, and Russ was the G3 Operations Officer. We had lunch together, and I reminded Russ that we used to say about him, his idea of a plan was decided at lunch what he was going to do that afternoon. But despite that casual attitude toward planning, Russ has prospered, as you guys all know. Larry Githerman and Chris. Larry and I, went to war together. We were majors in the 1st Division together, and we've known each other practically forever. My cousin Wendell and his wife Margaret. My brother Tim is here. My cousin Connie and Ted and their granddaughter Allison is here. Now, the rule for the family is, it said, I'd like you to buy at least 10 books. Ted's bought 6, so he's a good start, Ted. Keep it up, pal. Jim and Ann Lawrenstoss that we served with in Desert Storm. Nick and Kristen Lovelace. And those of you that speak Cajun French, don't try it on Nick, because he speaks no kidding French, which is a whole different prospect. And Andrew Woods from the Cantini the McCormick Research Center. He is the search engine. If you call up there and you want to ask a question, if he doesn't know it, he can find it. So Andrew Woods, glad to have you here. And I want to shout out to my new friend, Mike Bell. When I was a brigade commander, I wrote him a letter welcoming him to the 1st Brigade, 1st Armored Division. And then, having written that letter, I left so I wouldn't have to cope with him. He came right after I left. So there you go, sir. Thank you for letting me do that. And I hope I haven't missed anybody, but if I have, please forgive me. It's always best to stack the audience with your friends.
Well, hopefully those are the friends, but, we're glad you're here. Let's launch into it. I mean, this is a pretty daunting task. This is a division with 9 campaigns in the war. How did you come about writing this book? Because you could easily say, maybe I'll just pick one campaign, or this, or really to pull it together is a pretty incredible task.
Well, it came about really when I did this in 2019. Rob Citino said, well, what is it you think you'll do next? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm going to look around and see what can be done. And I thought about it. There is not a single volume history of the 1st Infantry Division that wasn't written by the 1st Infantry Division. So at the end of World War II, they put together a committee of journalists, okay, and soldiers, including Hanson Baldwin.
True Middleton.
I'm drawing a brain.
True Middleton.
Yeah, exactly. All famous combat journalists. Ernie Pyle used to say that his favorite division was the 1st Division. He got killed in Okinawa, or he would have been on the team. H.R. Knickerbocker, who was a big-time journalist in those days, and one of only 2 female combat journalists, and I can't remember her name. So I looked at that and said, well, this is really, they really used after-action reports. It really wasn't a history. So what I wanted to do was understand the division's history, but to a specific point. My theme was, how did the 1st Infantry Division maintain tactical excellence throughout World War II when it suffered 206% casualties? Moreover, people got reassigned. So if Joe got killed, somebody had to take Joe's place, which meant Joe had to have somebody replace him. So now you have 3 little bits of turbulence, and that spreads through the area. And you'd have officers that joined the 1st Division in 1940 as second lieutenants are commanding battalions in Sicily in 1943. So trust me, when you go from lieutenant to lieutenant colonel battalion commander, from running 44 people to running 800 people, you got to learn something. You have to adapt. You got to be able to figure that out. So I wanted to understand that. And so the other piece of that was I picked the 1st Infantry Division for 2 very good reasons. Eisenhower thought it was in the top tier of divisions. He thought the 3rd Infantry Division, damn him, was the very best division in the Army and the European theater, but the 1st Infantry Division was right up there. And the other thing was I could get help from the McCormick Foundation. Researching a book costs money, not only in time, but National Archives Administration. You've got to get to where the material is. And so thank you to the McCormick Foundation for helping me. But that's a long answer to a short question. But this book is about how do you teach leadership and how do you adapt and innovate when you fought in North Africa, to include Tunisia and Algeria, Sicily, France, Belgium, Germany, get to the Elbe River, and oh, by the way, you're there until 1955. How do you adapt and change to keep up with all that?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. The Army's trying to, how do we change from counterinsurgency into large-scale combat operations? But here's an example of a unit that's learning every day and constantly adapting. And I think you had 443 days in combat. I mean, imagine that. 9 campaigns, 3 assault landings. Any one of those, would be the song of legend in any unit. And, you know, the ability to maintain tactical excellence while you're constantly turning over is I think, this incredible story that you've captured here. And now let's explore it, though, because you describe it as top-down and bottom-up. And it's, you know, you start with kind of the critiques after Algeria, and then you see this system kind of forming up.
Let's do two things before we get to that. Let's show the picture of Swinken.
Yep.
And I think I can. I'm sorry for
No
turning on you
worries.
there. A surprise requirement. I want to show you who these guys were.
He's the guy toward the end, right? Number
Yeah,
22?
he's toward the end. 22, I think
Okay.
it is. Yeah, 22. This.
Hold on.
That's not quite it, but it's okay. We'll be there. And those are some. I
Right
get
here.
to see a lot of pictures. This is a good thing. There he is.
Yeah.
So Swinken is this guy is getting ready to cross a rural river. He has a life preserver on around his waist, and if you look at him, you see a couple of grenades, and then down around where the life preserver is, he has a bunch of pop-up flares. He's smoking a cigarette, and look at the look on that guy's face. He knows why he's there. And Swinken particularly knew why he was there, because he's a Jewish American. And they're fighting in Germany, and he knows why the hell he's there. That's who this story's about. And a guy like Swinken, let's start bottom up. If you arrive in the 1st Infantry Division, you could arrive in any number of ways. The ideal way, and segue, why do we do individual replacement? Everybody talks about individual replacement. It's a terrible thing. You ought to rotate units. Absolutely. So to rotate units, the Army estimated it needed 200 divisions. The United States Army built 89, and the Marine Corps built 6. All 89 U.S. Army divisions and all 6 Marine divisions had deployed overseas, and all but one had fought. And one Army division had been taken prisoner when Corregidor surrendered, so it was out of the fight from then on. And by the way, for the Marine Corps friends of ours in the audience, I know there's several of you, you know, if you read if you watch TV, you think the only people who fought in the Pacific were Marines. There were 22 Army divisions in the Pacific. The 1st Marine Division didn't secure Guadalcanal. The 25th Infantry Division and the 2nd Marine Division did. At Peleliu, the Marines ate up the 1st Marine Division, so an Army division had to secure Peleliu. And I don't mean any disrespect to the Marine Corps, but FYI, there were some gringo soldiers in that fight in World War II. And there's Russ Honore. We were just talking about you, Russ. Glad to have you here tonight. Russ Honore is a hero here in New Orleans, and he was not a hero to Al Turner and me, but he was a hero here in New Orleans. Russ, thank you. I'm glad you could make it, sir. Russ has just been doing an interview about the tragedy in Maui, and so I'm glad he could make it. So you might arrive and go through a battle school. The 1st Division ran a week-long battle school when it could. But if you do 443 days of combat, sometimes there are no battle schools. One of my favorite soldiers is a guy named Jim Sharp, who happens to be still alive, and I'm grateful to that because I interviewed 7 World War II veterans this last 2 years, and all but one is dead. You know, we're losing those guys at the speed of light. Jim came up with food, chow, about 1:30 in the morning in January 1945 in the Battle of the Bulge. And his squad leader put him in a hole with another guy. He said, I'll be back at 0300. We attack at 0400. You guys stick with me and I'll get you through this. In about a week's time, Jim had learned enough to stay alive, and by the end of the war, he was a staff sergeant squad leader, and he was a sergeant of the guard guarding the likes of Jodl and Keitel in Nuremberg in 1945. These stories are really amazing when you think of how fast these kids learn. And bear in mind, these ran the gamut from America's best and brightest. One of my favorite soldiers is a guy who graduated with honors in Yale in 1943, joined the U.S. Army, turned down OCS, turned down battlefield commissions to remain a section sergeant in an 81 Miller mortar platoon. This is a commitment to duty that you don't see. And the other end of the spectrum was you had to have 12 opposing teeth to get in the Army. Now, you're supposed to have 32, but if you had 12 that were opposing so you could chew your meat, you could get in the Army. You had to be 5 feet tall to get in the Army. Audie Murphy was too small for the Marine Corps, too small for the Navy, just the right size to be the most decorated soldier in World War II. And do you think Audie learned a couple things? Audie didn't finish high school. He was basically illiterate. And the Army's talking about, we can't take non-high school graduates. Why the hell not? Well, they said, well, because technology is so much more difficult. Now, I can tell you as a tanker, in World War II, you didn't have a rangefinder. So you had to do something called the worm formula. You had to do high math. Width is equal to range over mils, and the width of a tank, when it's 45 oblique, is this feet. So what did they do? They figured out, this is stupid. I'm not going to do math under fire. They shot white phosphorus, just like in the movie Fury, and then adjusted fire. So now, if you point the gun, point the laser, point it, then pull the trigger, boom, target, cease fire. So when people tell me technology is hard, it's hard for the engineers maybe, but it isn't hard for the gringos that are shooting M1 tanks. And I know this is true because Dave Gross and I were pretty damn good tankers. Of course, we did some high math in our younger days. I'm getting off the subject here, but back to the subject. Learning and adapting is what we're talking about. So if you don't have a rangefinder and you don't want to do, high math under fire, you shoot white phosphorus and adjust, just like they showed in the movie. The other thing I would tell you is if you got the time, the division would walk you through its heritage and traditions, no kidding, no mission too difficult, no sacrifice too great. And the 1st Infantry Division really believes that stuff, by the way. This is how you can do 3 assault landings. And a little segue, there's 2 ways I do never want to go into a combat zone. By parachute or wading in the water. Another American I want to tell you about, and I'll eventually get to the other question. Alfred Momini is a young man from New York. Too short to get in the Army, too short to get in the Navy, too short to get in the Marine Corps until he wasn't. In 1944, when we ran out of troops, Alfred was just tall enough at 60 inches tall to carry the 48-inch M1 rifle, which with its bayonet would be taller than him. When he got off the boat in one of those Higgins boats, LCVPs, Landing Craft Vehicles and Personnel, in Normandy, he went to the bottom, and the bottom was several feet deeper than he was. And so he would jump up into the wave, get a gulp of air, sink back down, and he bounded his way to Omaha Beach under fire. Now, I got to tell you, I got a lot of time for a guy like that. Talk about adapting. It's either drown or adapt, and he did. So when you think about what these guys did, the way they were received, the 1st Division had a plan. Often it couldn't execute. The same was true of officers. But the way that the soldiers reported it to me when I read in interviews or actually talking to people, they were brought along by the NCOs in the squad and the platoon. And that included platoon leaders. So this is tribal wisdom being passed on. If you do this, you're going to get killed. If you do this other thing, you're going to survive. And that kind of tribal wisdom led to things like the Cullen hedgerow device, where you put the teeth on the tank and you cut your way through the bocage. No engineer figured that out. A cavalryman from New York figured that out. So when you're talking about adaptation and innovation, the U.S. soldier, the American tradition in World War II, and since, it's been, we're going to innovate our way out of this because we didn't plan it maybe as well as we might have. Officer training was a little different. The way you learn as an officer in combat at the platoon level was, through the OCS program, through West Point, whatever it was, and through a program in the interwar period that was called the Plattsburgh Project. It was civilian military training. You'd volunteer for it. No one paid you. They fed you 3 meals a day. But Americans signed up to go train in case they needed to go to war. Let me say that again. Americans signed up to go train in case they needed to go to war. And because of that, the United States Army, and this would get us to the National Defense Act, so I won't go into that. The United States Army mobilized 29 divisions between August of 1940 and December 1941. 29 divisions, each of about 13,000 people. And yet the Army had declined to a strength of 125,000 in 1925. So all of that requires innovation and adaptation. That's another long answer.
Well, and just to add to that, though, particularly for those who became the senior officers, they were all graduates of a professional military education school system, Leavenworth, the War College, that, in many ways, focused on higher level units, way above what they would have imagined at the time. So
what Mike is saying is absolutely right. The U.S. Army in the interwar period, because of the experience in World War I, and oh, by the way, World War I is an impressive thing, too. We mobilized 42 divisions in World War I between April of 1917 and November of 18, and 41 went to France. This country can do amazing things when it puts its mind to it. And we ran a staff college. So because when you go from no divisions to 41 divisions in a year and a half, somebody has to tell you how to move 25,000 people in a World War I division. And we decided we were going to fix that through education. So in the interwar period, the U.S. Army Staff College was 2 years. In the first year, they were looking at the tactical level, below division, and in the second year, they looked at division and corps. Winston Churchill said it best when he said, and I'm paraphrasing, to the effect that your staff college won the war. Because we could educate people in the absence of having any troops. And Russ and I and Al and Larry Githerman and anybody that went to the staff college, Dave Gross, we all did staff rides in Kansas. He said, well, they're going to fight in Kansas. Yes, we could, because we always talked about the evil guys attacking from Beatrice, Nebraska. But when you're walking the ground in Leavenworth, Kansas, and you're talking about how wide is this avenue of approach? Well, an avenue of approach in Kansas looks like a lot like an avenue of approach anywhere else except the desert, because we happen to be in eastern Kansas where there are hills and woods and rivers. So when you think about what they were doing, they were adapting to the problem that they perceived might happen in the absence of the material to do it. With 200,000 troops at the end of the 30s, you really couldn't do much. We technically had 54 divisions on the books because of some legislation, but we weren't manning them at strength. So you had a cadre of people, and you had an education system that enabled it.
So let me jump into one thing, because in addition to this initiative at low level, you paint a picture in the book about procedures and policies. For example, when units aren't in combat, they're not resting. They're actually training continuously. But the other one I thought was very interesting was in your piece on the breakout, very detailed march tables. And the engineers would have this. So you had systems within this unit that obviously people learned and fell in on. They weren't just making it up as they went, but they fell in on expertise on each of these areas. And like the march tables, if you're moving a unit that's 12 miles long on little French roads, you really do need the engineers to tell you what bridges you can cross, where the things are, everything else. So I just wanted to get your sense of that, because it's an interesting mix of initiative.
There's art and science, and you're talking about the science. And the science of that goes back to the legions of Rome. I mean, there's a reason Rome built roads, because that's how you move armies. But the old dead Karl, as we call him, Karl von Clausewitz, who wrote the book Vom Krieg on war, talks about pastimes and march units in the Napoleonic era. Well, it applied even when all of us, it applies to this very day. So if you have 54 tanks in a tank battalion, each tank is 25 feet long, and you're going to go 50-meter interval, 25 times 54 times 50 meters.
You said we're not doing math.
But I'm not going to do any more math than that. Pretty soon, it's a long column. And we taught people how to do that in the staff college.
Well, and then what size bridges are too small for those tanks?
Well, and we built the M4 Sherman tank to operate on roads in Europe, so we had narrow track so they could go fast. We built them so they were 20 tons and could fit easily into a break bulk ship, which is what we had then. We didn't have roll on, roll off. And our concept for them was they were going to follow infantry. The infantry would penetrate the enemy, make a hole. The tanks would go through, and it would kill rear areas and command posts. They weren't going to fight other tanks, which is why we built tank destroyers. Now, Mike and I were talking before we came up here. Both he and I think the M4 Sherman tank was a great tank. But a lot of wannabe soldiers will tell you that the German tanks were better than ours. Yeah, if all you're talking about is firepower, but if you're talking about reliability, mobility, all of those things, they don't do very well. And yeah, they could kill our tanks at a pretty high number, and both the Germans and the Americans called the M4 either the Zippo or the Ronson, because it would go up like a torch when it got hit. But if you used your brain, you maneuvered, which we did, you could kill tigers, and you've seen Fury, I'm sure.
So here, we'll talk about tank warfare. Arguably the Germans are the masters of Blitzkrieg in 1940, 41. And you introduce, the Kasserine story in your book, but the 1st Division gets some pretty high praise from Rommel. Arguably, by the breakout after St. Lo, the American Army has now become the masters of this art form, combined arms, tank, infantry, radios, air, way beyond, the Germans, I think, no longer are a learning organization to the extent the American Army is. And maybe talk about that, because I think that's one of the surprises that people would go, oh, it's just American logistics. Well, maybe, but it's American logistics that's now really put together in this combined arms team that is decisive.
Well, we excelled at, let's not talk about logistics. Let's talk for a moment about the tactics.
We'll get logistics
We need to
later.
talk about logistics because my good friend Russ Honore said if it was easy, it'd be called tactics. If it's called logistics because it's hard to do. So at Kasserine, I wrote a chapter called "The Wehrmacht as Tutors," because we got tutored in North Africa at Kasserine Pass and other places. The Germans showed us how to do what Rob Patton called Bewegungskrieg, the war of movement, or Blitzkrieg, if you like. And that's the whole business of massing armor, using it in mass, supported by infantry with artillery preparation. You bring all the combined arms together, you synchronize the fight, and it's not something for knuckle draggers. It takes a little science and a little art at the same time. And then you can penetrate the enemy, and once you've penetrated, you've made a breakthrough. As you go out, you exploit the breakthrough. You widen the hole. And then the next thing is the enemy's got to leave. That gets you into the pursuit, which ever since the dawn of time, it's the pursuit that destroys the enemy better than anything else. And you can pick examples, the prehistoric time, the Sassanid armies and cataphracts and the rest of it. By 1944, we had learned the lessons from the Germans. The other thing that was true is the Germans had a theory of Bewegungskrieg, but they never had the material to do it. And one of the things post-war historians, well, the German army was really excellent and superior to the American army. The Americans just did better because they had more of everything. And I mean, that's like saying, I'm inviting you to a knife fight. Well, if you do that, I'm going to bring a gun. And I'm not going to apologize for using a gun on you. So if we have an advantage in the fact that we have more of everything, tough. You shouldn't have started the fight if you couldn't take a joke. I mean, it's asymmetric. If the other guy has 2, bring 4. And then you can maneuver all you want, but if you got 4 to 2, you're probably going to be okay.
Well, and this is almost to the point you bring in the book, the German quote, wherever the 1st Division was, we knew there would be trouble.
And the 1st Division was cheat. They would attack at night. They always fought by bounding battalions, and that means a regiment has 3 battalions. So generally what you would do, this part's fairly easy to talk about, is you'd keep 2 battalions in each regiment on the move. And then you would pull a battalion out, replace it with the 3rd battalion, so you get a little bit of a rest to resupply. That's where the logistics came in. And we had a very robust logistics system based on supply point distribution. If you've seen the really bad movie called Battle of the Bulge, where the Germans were trying to get to the gasoline supply, that's because we had these great dumps, which meant you didn't have to haul it around everywhere. When you passed the dump, you sent your trucks to it. And the field armies took care of that. Divisions and corps didn't, so they were very agile and fast. In 1944, both the U.S. Army and the Germans redesigned their divisions because we were running out of troops. We had 5.85 million, 5,850,000 American soldiers in uniform, not counting the Air Corps. The Germans had 5.5 million in 1945. So they were about the same size as us. Bad news for them is they had Russians. What I forgot to mention to you is we were fighting in the Pacific and in the Persian Gulf and a whole bunch of other places. We fought in more theaters than the Germans did. But we never outnumbered them on the Western Front till the end of the war, and that's another thing people forget. In any case, the German Infantry Division had 2,000 vehicles. Sadly, 1,100 of them were horse-drawn. The American Infantry Division had 1,800 or 1,900 vehicles, but none of ours were drawn by horses. So we did, in fact, have a mobility advantage. And that mobility advantage enabled us, along with our tactical expertise, to quickly outmaneuver the Germans and to be able to sustain the pursuit unless we ran out of fuel. And as you know, we did in 1944.
No, but that's one of those huge stories, this idea that here's a learning organization that now masters this and surpasses it. And it's not the accumulation of logistics, it's the ability to integrate this. And
well, it's the ability to react and change because Bradley's commanding an army group. At one point, he had 3 field armies. Montgomery's commanding an army group with 2 field armies. Devers is in the south of France, commanding an army group with 2 field armies. And when you change priorities, That means routes have to be laid out, trucks have to be found, the ammunition supply points have to be moved, and you're talking about short tons, not pounds or gallons. You're talking about tens of millions of gallons.
Well,
Now,
and you also, just to cut in, you also highlight how they transition. The U.S. Army is very much about marksmanship early in the war, but how they learn, and particularly in the 1st Division, suppressive fire, harassing interdiction fires, infantry suppressing, all this is very, very effective against these adversaries.
well, and Hubner, who took over from Terry Allen in Sicily and by the way, 80 years ago today, the Battle of Sicily was still ongoing. The 1st Infantry Division had just secured Troina, depending how you want to pronounce it, on the western slopes of Mount Etna. The Brits were closing in on Messina. Patton had seized Palermo, and he was coming east towards Messina. But the issue was that our ability to shift priority was based on the math of march tables and based on being able to estimate. And we're talking about enormous quantities for the time. The Red Ball Express, which probably everybody's heard of, is a one-way route and a one-way back in order to try to keep fuel forward, because fuel was, in the pursuit, fuel is what you use, not ammo. 800,000 gallons. And that's about 200 miles they were going. In 2003, by comparison, the U.S. Army was moving 2.5 million gallons of fuel, 300 miles every day to do the fight up to Baghdad. So fuel hasn't, the problem of fuel hasn't gone smaller, it's bigger. Churchill said in World War I, the Allies won on an ocean of gasoline. All of the Allies put together used 40 million. We were using 2.5 million a day in OIF. And the distance from Kuwait to Baghdad is the distance from Omaha Beach to Remagen Bridge on the Rhine. So you're talking about scale and scope of what your Army could do in 2003, and it learned a lot of that from what your Army could do in 1944 or 45.
No, I think that's exactly right. So let's hit D-Day. There's a kind of notion out there that the reason we succeeded on D-Day is we were just lucky. We were just lucky. The people that survived somehow were lucky and made it to the tops of the bluffs. You would suggest that instead that there's actually leadership that's a key component here, and followership in that piece. And so, maybe it's George Taylor, maybe it's some others, but can you comment a little bit about how you see that D-Day becomes a successful American assault?
Well, arguably the best book on D-Day, I argue that, I don't know if everybody does, is John McManus's book, The Dead and Those Who Are About to Die, which is about the 1st Infantry Division in Normandy. And he focuses on Omaha Beach exclusively and what it took to do that. Well, the scale of the problem is something I don't think most people understand. There were 2 divisions that assaulted Omaha, and I'm not going to leave out Sword, Juno, and Gold, but that's for different time, different story, or Utah. And each of those beaches had their own distinct characteristics. Omaha is characterized by heights at the western end. I get confused on directions because it doesn't look right. No, Normandy, when you land in Normandy, you're attacking north. And it seems weird. It seems like you ought to be heading east when you're really going north. But at the western end is Pont de Hope, which everybody that's seen The Longest Day has seen that. And if you go there yourself, which I've had the opportunity to do with Dana, and we say, oh my God, how'd they do this? Which, by the way, the Ranger Battalion commander that did that took his sons there 10 years afterwards in 1954, and he said, oh my God, how did we do this? I don't know how they did it, but it was a scary proposition. And the Germans had built what they called Widerstand-Nest along the beach. So the Germans could defend the beach with relatively fewer people than it would take to see the beach, because they were absolutely in perfect position. You're going to show the sector sketch? That's a good one. Have we got the, yeah. So if you look at that sector sketch, this is probably from Widerstand-Nest 62, where most of the damage done on Omaha Beach occurred. And I'm going to turn around and see if I can make the pointer work without taking anybody's eyes out. This button here.
blazing.
So, again,
The screen
obviously,
may be too bright.
Too stupid to do it. It's too bright.
Yeah.
So if you look at the far end, you can see the high ground curving away. Then you look at what they're trying to say. Waffes 5cm PAC 38 is a anti-tank gun. PAC is Panzer Abwehrkanone, anti-tank gun. So that's what that one is. Then it tells you what munitions they want you to use in there. Then it tells you about what kinds of landing craft. That's Landungsboot, a landing boat. And you see them at different ranges, so they're showing you aspects so that the gunners know what they're going to shoot at, and they know what the ground looks like in front of them. Now, Dana and I had, and by the way, I didn't do shout out to Dana, my wife of 53 years, but who's counting? Dana and I got to know a German soldier who was the last D-Day veteran not the very last, the last German D-Day veteran I got to talk to. He was the radio telephone operator for the 7th Artillery Regiment of the 352nd Division, which defended Omaha Beach. And he described it as a slaughter. And when you look at what happened at Omaha, this boat, the LCVP, would carry 31 men, a coxswain, and a couple of crewmen to run the craft. And so we didn't have enough landing craft in the Atlantic because they were all in the Pacific. And the LSTs that we had, the landing ship's tank, and the LCM, the landing craft material, and the LCT landing craft tank, and we had a whole bunch of landing craft. We didn't have enough of them. We didn't have enough naval gunfire support. At Kwajalein Island, the 7th Infantry Division went ashore with battleship support from 6 battleships. At Omaha Beach, we had 2 from World War I, the USS Texas and the USS Arkansas. Later on, I'll show you a picture of a duck passing a DUKW, a 2.5-ton amphibious truck, passing the USS Texas 10 miles offshore. When you see this picture, you say, man, I would never get in something going that far.
Yeah, I mean, that was interesting because you were talking about you're gonna board the landing craft 11 or 12 miles out.
Yeah.
And in very choppy seas. I mean, the Germans didn't think the weather was going to be good enough.
So the weather was awful, and when that kind of a craft with a flat bottom, when you're going through the waves, and there was chop because of that, you saw the shape, the elliptical shape of the bay there. They were going up and down. We call that pitch. They were rolling, and they were yawing. And guess what that does to your tummy if you had bacon and eggs at 2 o'clock that morning? So these guys were sick as hell. And then the boats don't go where they're supposed to. The funny thing is the kids running the boats are 19 or 20 years old. The kids in the boats are 19, 20 years old. So you got teenagers running the show. And some of you have raised teenagers. Sometimes they go astray. You had one landing craft from 116th Infantry Regiment landed on the far eastern side of the 1st Division. So they had gone 2 kilometers, 2,000, 3,000 meters in the wrong direction. Some guys say, well, I'm going to turn my boat and I'm going to go back down to where I'm supposed to be, and you get flank shots. So what happens is instead of 800 guys in the first wave, 800, and the defenders have 3,200, as I recall. So it's not a fair fight. And when you get ashore, the Bedford boys, Alpha Company, 116th Infantry Regiment, the company commander and everybody in his boat section is killed before the ramp goes down. So the company leadership's gone. So what happens is people like Lieutenant John Spaulding, and his staff sergeant, whose name I can never pronounce, they get ashore and they make their way up the Colville Bluffs. And if you go to Normandy and you imagine that you're landing at Normandy during that time, you got to get through the water to get to the 90 millimeter sized gravel that's on the beach. It's all gone now because we used it for ballast for roads in World War II. Then you've got to go over a seawall about 4 feet. Then you have to cross about 1/4 mile and climb the Colville thing. And that has to be done by small unit leaders, because guess what the generals can do? They can't talk to anybody. Can we get the Wyman's picture? I want to show you the advanced command post of the 1st Division.
That's like
See
that one right
there
there.
he is.
Yeah, there's the
So
assistant
there's
division
General
commander.
Wyman, the assistant division commander of the 1st Infantry Division, of the advanced command post of the 1st Infantry Division in Normandy. And what he did that was brilliant is he said, don't send me any more tanks, send me only infantry. Meanwhile, George Taylor, the man who said, only the dead and those who are about to die, is walking down the beach fully erect, and everybody in his little command group is crawling on the ground because this man's going to get them killed. But that's how they got off the beach. Leadership at the top, doing the right thing, and junior soldiers doing that.
And to hit George Taylor, two things I thought were interesting in your book. One is how he had written a report for the big Army back training about infantry, observations on infantry in 43. So you have units not only learning, but helping the rest of the Army learn on its infantry. And then the second was his emphasis on psychology. And I think you see that, here he is upright on Omaha Beach. and you know, the psychology thing
An
is...
example of courage under fire that might be described as lunatic courage. Gets people off the beach. And it's perfectly logical. Say, if you stay on the beach, hunkered down, with that guy looking through his sector sketch, firing a machine gun at you, or a PAC-38, or whatever he's shooting at you, you're better off moving. You know, moving targets are harder to hit. Anybody that's, you know, hunted dove know that's true. That's why us Cajuns shoot them on wires. I mean, only a fool let the dove fly, right? You shoot them on wires, preferably from a pickup truck. You know? That way you don't have to walk, and, you know, your beer can stay in the cooler. I know these things because I watched a couple of times, you know, Swamp People. I didn't want to watch it because I was afraid Wendell might be in it, you know. So anyway, getting ashore is not the mission, though. The lodgement is the next step. So when you think about parachuting in or going by boat, that's not a mission. That's just a task. You're on your way to somewhere. You have to get there. And then once you're there, you got to get ashore, and you got to push the enemy far enough back that you can begin to unload vehicles and equipment, hospitals, doctors, ammunition. Then you got to push them farther back so the artillery can't get you. And then we arrive in the bocage, which we knew about but had not thought much about. Well, why is that, you say to yourself? Well, let me tell you why. If you're planning the invasion of Normandy, thinking much past 24 hours is just about beyond you. And Dave, you can second this or not, Larry. When we were getting ready to, do the breach in Desert Storm, General Franks, the Corps commander, come and say, Greg, in about 2 weeks, I expect we're going to be here or there. I said, why is this old man talking to me? I may not be alive day after tomorrow. It's really hard to concentrate on the future when you can't think much past this first day or two. And they were captured by the problem of getting ashore.
Well, and to add to it, they've already conducted other amphibious assaults. So they absolutely know what's ahead.
They know how bad it's going to be.
Right.
And experience isn't enough. One of the stories I tell in there is a staff sergeant who's on his third landing. He knows how to do this. He's learned how to lead a squad. He's killed on the 12th of June. And somebody has to step up and take that experienced squad leader's place. And that's the story that we're talking about. I want to mention critiques, they call them, after-action reviews. Can we find that picture of...
we can find that.
Yeah, the after-action review.
This is like number 3 or 4.
Yeah, it's pretty quick.
Right
there, go back one.
Right there.
All right, if you look at this, this is the 16th Infantry Regiment after the North African invasion. And you see the little guy in the funky little hat, the little stocking cap? That's Ernie Pyle.
That narrows it right down.
Yeah,
right?
That narrows it down. He wore that. There, I said at North Algeria. It's actually in Tunisia. And so this is an early version. So what did we do wrong? What can we do better? And every one of those, you mentioned George Taylor, but the 1st Division published lessons learned. Eisenhower himself, the Supreme Commander in North Africa, published his own lessons learned. Divisions, regiments, everybody talked about, well, what can we do better? Because this is about living. There's nothing that concentrates your mind about studying your mistakes if it may make the difference between life and death. And they did that. And I think the 1st Infantry Division did it particularly well, obviously.
No, that's great. And we could, we can open up for questions. You could ask about their relationship with Patton or how eccentric they were early in the war or any other number of things. But how about if we first give Greg a round of applause?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. That went okay.
Yeah, we're not done yet.
No, I know.
But in fairness to the crew that's here, let's see what questions you guys might have and fire at will.
Yeah, please raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you. We'll start in the front, right in front of you, gentlemen.
Thank you for being here. I truly enjoyed this presentation, but I see you've presented a bunch of photographs here. Could you tell us about some of those photographs and maybe explain some of them?
Sure. Go back a couple, because there's one of my favorite photographs in there. Is a baby-faced soldier. You see this photograph? This is a British landing craft. You guys know which one's the baby-faced soldier, right? I don't need to point that out. He won 2 Silver Stars by the end of the war. And these guys, I mean, they went from 5 feet tall to 6 feet tall. They went from 12 teeth and no education to Yale graduates, and they all soldiered together. So that picture is captivating to me, because I see that guy and I know what happened to him, know when he died, and I don't know any of the others. I wish I knew more about them. Did you want to go see some more pictures? Please, if you could. Well, we can do that. Well, let's just zap through them then.
Okay. There's certainly Bob.
That's the critique. This is Gela, Sicily, during a counterattack on the 10th of July, 1943, by the Hermann Goering Fallschirmjäger Panzer Division, which is what's the right word? It was a invention by Goering to make, it's a Luftwaffe outfit, Air Force outfit. They gave them tanks, 124 tanks, including 14 Tigers. But they didn't have parachutes. Tanks don't do well with parachutes. And they got beaten very badly that day. They got all the way to the beach, but the reason they didn't go is the 1st Division learned at Kasserine Pass. If you don't panic and they don't have enough infantry with them, you can kill them when they go by you, or the artillery can kill them, or in this case, the USS Savannah and I can't remember the name of the other light cruiser. 2 Navy light cruiser really butchered those guys. 6-inch naval gun will do a job on a tank. Let's go on. Let's go on. That is Pontelivio Airfield, about 7 or 8 kilometers north of Gela on the plain. And in the far distance, you can see what the rest of Sicily is, which is high mountains, 3,300, 3,500 feet. Okay. I can't see what that is.
Well, we'll just skip it.
Oh, that's the last fight of the 1st Division, big fight, before the end of the war. And what's interesting about this is this little town, we're going to show you the picture, being attacked from two different directions by American units, and coming up from the southeast, or the lower right corner, is a British, Canadian unit. So now you have converging friendly units all shooting at the same place. Bad things can happen, so you have to coordinate that so you don't kill each other. Next one, sir.
This is Triana.
That's Trina again. You can see the high ground. That's the town. You're looking west. So if you think about all those arrows that were coming towards the town, they were coming from the low ground coming up. One of the soldiers of the 1st Division said, everywhere we go, we have to fight uphill. Someday I want to fight downhill. Next chart. That's the Robert K. Rowan blowing up on the 11th of July, 1943, by bombing attack, combination, I think it was mostly Messerschmitt, twin-engine Me-110 fighter bombers. Next. This is the farewell effort for the guy on the left is a sociopath known as George Patton. Then you have Hubner, Cliff Andrus, the artillery commander and assistant division commander. Hobart Gay, I don't know who the colonel is.
Unidentified colonel.
Unidentified colonel, and Wyman. And Wyman, I don't have time to talk about it, but just let me throw 3 things at you. He spoke Chinese, mapped the Gobi Desert. He was a cavalryman, walked out of Burma with Wedemeyer, not Wedemeyer.
Stillwell.
Yeah, what you said.
Yeah.
My mind is going.
Yeah.
He's an impressive guy. Later on, he commands his own division.
So real quick, can you give us the short version of the animosity between Patton and the 1st
George
Division?
Patton, I've heard him described as a great soldier, but he wouldn't be your choice for a husband, father, brother, friend. He and Terry Allen, who's the 1st Division commander in Sicily and in North Africa, were longtime friends and rivals, both. So one day, Allen's division headquarters, or Patton's visiting the division headquarters, he says, Terry, which one of these is your slit trench? And Terry showed him, and so Patton promptly peed in it. And said, I dare you to get in it now. And, the 1st Division had an attitude about Terry Allen and about Teddy Roosevelt, the president's son. They loved those guys. And so when the word got around that Patton had pissed in Allen's trench, Patton was kind of on the short list of shitheads as far as they were concerned. Moreover, The guy in the movie that he slaps and knocks the helmet off is Charles Cool, an infantryman in the 1st Infantry Division who had been through 2 campaigns by then, was suffering from malaria and what we now know as post-traumatic stress syndrome. And the boys knew about that too. After the Algiers or Tunisian campaign, they went into rest camps. When they get to the rear area, everybody in the rear area, and everybody that's been in the Army knows how this works. The guys in the rear area, they're wearing brand new lightweight khakis. The guys that are coming into the rear area from fighting are wearing worn out, threadbare, woolen uniforms in North Africa in the freaking summertime. It's hot. And they had liberated Iran, but they're told they can't go in there, and they can't go to the wine stuba or the wine shops and have a glass of wine. So the 1st Infantry Division liberated Iran a second time and caused a whole bunch of heartache.
Well, and your point you made
Patton-
earlier, Patton didn't want to give them new uniforms.
Patton didn't want to give them new uniforms because, as he told Terry Allen, he expected to lose 50% of them in Sicily, so why should they have uniforms that were going to be used that somebody else could use? So the troops knew this. So this Hubner wants to take his good friend, George Patton, around to each of the transports that's going to carry the 1st Division.
So Hubner's the new
Who's
guy
the
that
new
replaces
CG?
Terry Allen.
Terry Allen got relieved at the end of and there's a whole story there we can't talk about tonight. But he wants to be feted by the division, cheered. Now, that he had already done the apology tour with the 1st Division, and not a word was said by 12,000 men. Not a clap, not a boo, not a screw you, nothing. So Hubner tells the division, I want you guys to line the rail and cheer Patton when he comes by. Now, they lined the rail, but they didn't say a word. They did not, and so the 1st Division never served in the 3rd Army in Europe. And they didn't mind.
So the rest of the story. So we saw that, and there's the Division Assault Command Post. Pretty sporty. Boom.
That's Eisenhower and his guys in Normandy talking to Hubner and his people. And Omar Bradley's the guy with his side facing us, or he's to the left of Eisenhower. Next one. This is how you mechanize an infantry division. You chuckle about it, but when Russ and I and Mike and Eric came in the Army, the M60 had the tank we had an infantry rail for the infantry to hold on to, because that's how you motorize the infantry. Next one. This happens all the time in Europe. There's rivers everywhere. The guy you see on the walkie-talkie is the guy who's running metering the flow across the bridge. Next one, sir. That's the Hürtgen Forest.
That's the dry part.
Yeah, that's the dry part. Hürtgen Forest is dark and gloomy and cold in the summertime. In the wintertime, it rains there a lot. Next one, sir. That's the Hürtgen Forest also. That's our buddy, Swinken. That's the troops taking a break. I mean, they look dead.
The surprising thing is they're sleeping.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just lay down on the cobblestones and go to sleep. I mean, it just tells you how bone
I've been there,
tired they
done that in the desert. I laid down on the floor of the desert and was gone to sleep in about 2 seconds. The next one, sir. And I guess that's it.
There's you.
All right, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So. You got time for more questions? Or no?
I think we do.
I saw another hand up. Do you have a question? We'll go to the front with General Mize.
You talked about the perseverance and the adjustability and the toughness of the soldiers there in World War II. They were all people who had lived with, survived, the Great Depression there, and were used to austerity and tough times, et cetera. If we go forward and we have a modern conflict we have to take on with somebody, and we see our youth now that haven't had much experience in the military, they, you say 25, 27% are obese. We know that only 23% of the youth recruitment age can qualify right now. How would you see our current crop of American youth being able to adapt and have the perseverance and the grittiness and whatnot that you saw and described here with the World War II soldiers?
I think they can. I mean, there was a recruiting theme back when the Army was doing effective recruiting themes that said, it wasn't easy, but when you called us, we were there. And then the other one that I liked was, how did it go? It wasn't easy. It was every generation has its heroes. This one does too. And so the Army right now, they're looking at if you had Ritalin or something prescribed for ADHD, you got to be vetted and cleared. If you didn't finish high school, we don't want you. My dad never finished high school, and by 1943, he was running both the electric motors and the diesel motors on a U.S. submarine in 5 war patrols. So you don't have to be a college graduate, you know, you can learn whether or not you have the degree or not. The third thing keeping people out is moral issues that they may have had, you know, arrest and so forth. Obesity is a problem. So the Army's got something, the cynics are calling fat camps. They bring them in, get them in shape. One of the problems is because kids are full of soda and all that kind of stuff, they have spiral fractures, you know, their bones break easily. So we got to fix some of that. If they didn't go to high school, my idea would be enlist them. Don't get them to basic until they get to basic high school. And then you take the kids in that you can get through 3 or 4 months and get them to where they can pass the basic math skills and science skills to be in the Army. But if you think about, we raised an Army, counting the U.S. Air Force and the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Army, we had 12 million in uniform with a population, according to the 1940 census, of a little over 130 million. We're about 360 now. I'd like to think we can man a 485,000 person Army out of that. Right now, we don't seem to be able to. So I think there's one problem is take care of the kids' problems, and that means educators, parents. I mean, this needs to be a full court press. Somebody needs to tell the country we need to do that. That's not the Army's job. Number 2 is you got to put the resources in the right place to make it possible. That's the U.S. Congress's job. I will not make any political statements about the United States Congress. That's my answer, sir. I think we can do this, but you got to be willing, and we have to make the case. Why are we in the Ukraine? Has anybody told us? You know, that's we got to talk to each other.
What I found encouraging in this book is you see what's possible, and you see how leaders set the tone. You know, no, you're not in the rear area resting. You're training. You're doing this. We're constantly learning, and I think that's an inspiring piece. You know, the Army's got an old saw that experience is the best teacher. What this book shows is experience without contemplation and without actually efforts to understand it and get better doesn't necessarily, you know, do much for you. And so this division, I think, had a secret formula that allowed it to take the guys from Brooklyn, guys from wherever. I mean, yeah, it starts as a regular Army division, but, you know, what it ends up with is really just a hodgepodge of America.
There were really no regular Army divisions within a year. Every division was a draftee division within a year. And so I am optimistic about American youth. I think they can do perfectly fine. And we just had a discussion with 1st Division CG today. 21 months in Europe with some rotation, but essentially the division was in 20 months. They just came back. And they have the highest re-enlistment rate in the Army. So the other thing is, you got to tell kids this is going to be exciting and fun and dangerous sometimes, because, you know, that, believe it or not, it appealed to me when I was a kid. So I think we can do this.
Gents to your right, halfway back.
Sir, I wonder if you could comment on Omar Bradley's relief of Terry Allen.
Well, Teddy Roosevelt said to Bradley, when Bradley gave him the good news, he said, "Brad, we have a lot better relationship with the Krauts up front than we do with you guys back here." Which, you know, one of the things about being in combat is you can talk to power. Truth to power is easy when you're in combat because somebody might kill you, so you don't mind telling people, since you might be gone the next day, just exactly what you think, and that's what Teddy did. Omar Bradley claims that he relieved Allen and Roosevelt. Everyone else in the story says no, and that these guys were tired. They'd been at it. They'd been in command together for almost 2 years. They'd been through 3 campaigns, and Eisenhower had it in his mind, and I've got his papers. I bought them. said that he was sending Terry Allen home to rest so he could take command of a corps. In the end, Allen got a division, not a corps, but he brought the 104th Division back. The second point is Teddy Roosevelt died of a heart attack just a couple of days before he was going to take command of the 90th Infantry Division. And if you've seen the movie Longest Day, he goes ashore with the 4th Infantry Division. So I think one of the things about memoirs is you have to take them with a grain of salt. And the other thing about, the same thing with diary. Everybody writes a diary, there's a little lock on it for the teenage girl so nobody can read it. She desperately wants someone to read it. You don't write a journal unless you want someone to read it. Otherwise, why write one? And so, you know, when you write your memoir, you generally make yourself appear tougher, better looking, taller, thinner, you know, whatever. And I think that's what Bradley was doing in A Soldier Story. That doesn't make him a bad guy, but he isn't. He isn't everything he said he was in his memoir. And if I write one, and I probably will, I'll leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Gents, to your left, all the way to the back.
You have a great name, Fontenot. Are you a Cajun?
Mais oui, je suis un Cajun de la Louisiane. Ma mère et mon père habitaient en Unis, and I don't speak very good French anymore because I'm not there, but I still read French pretty well. C'est rien, monsieur.
Greg, I'm going to save this last question for me. Sam Fuller made a movie starring Luke Skywalker and Lee Marvin.
Yep.
What do you think of The Big Red One?
It is everything Sam Fuller imagined The Big Red One to be. And by the way, his granddaughter, Samantha, is here in the 16th Infantry Command Post. Fuller, I tried to get them to let me use some of Sam's cartoons. We could never work it out. Sam was a great artist, a great writer. Every time he made a movie, there is a reference to the 1st Division in it, or there's a patch in it. Even his Westerns, he found a way to do it. One of his best movies is called Steel Helmet. It's in Korea, a place the 1st Division never fought. But all the tactical maps show 1st Division, 16th Infantry, 18th. So you might say Sam Fuller was I'm a lot like Sam Fuller. I'm a groupie for the 1st Division, and he was a groupie for the Big Red One. Quick story about him. He didn't want, the Army wanted to be a journalist. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to be an infantryman. So he winds up in the 26th Infantry. George Taylor's a regimental commander. Taylor started out commanding the 26th. He discovered this guy Fuller could write, so he shanghais Fuller to be his personal correspondent. And when he went to the 16th Infantry, he shanghaied Fuller to the 16th Infantry. And the 16th Infantry had every month it did a thing called Dagwood Dispatches. And it had cartoons of the Germans and the Americans and the narrative of the last month for the soldiers. And to this day, the 16th Infantry's newsletter is called Dagwood Dispatches. And that's because the 16th Infantry's telephone code name was Dagwood. Now, I had to run from that in a nanosecond, but the 16th Infantry accepted it, made it their own, and they still have it. By the way, Russ was the 16th Infantry soldier, commanded 4th Battalion, 16th Infantry. And that's it, I think. Thank you.
Well done.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Greg. Thank you, Mike. I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out, though he passed away in December of 2020, to one of my friends and who spoke here, Harley Reynolds, who served with the 16th and made 3 invasions. Harley claimed he wasn't the first guy to make it off the beach and through the wire, but he was the first guy to live through it off of Omaha Beach after watching the guys lead the way that he followed. So thank you to Greg for coming back. We look forward to your next one, so hurry up. Greg will be signing copies of his book over here by the Higgins boat, the LCVP. Be sure to mark your calendars for our next Meet the Author event on Thursday, September 14th, featuring Dave Gutierrez, who will be speaking about his book, Patriots from the Barrio, Company E of the 141st Regiment of the 36th Division, the only all-Mexican-American company that served in World War II. And he is a great speaker, great engager, and we hope you come back for that. Please check our events calendar. We have lots of programming. Obviously, we have our grand opening for the Liberation Pavilion coming up later this fall, but we have programs pertaining to our special exhibition on the second floor about the Nisei soldiers. And I think we have a Garden to Glass program coming up, so if you want to have fun and drink, not just drink and learn, have fun, drink and learn, which you did tonight. So thank you to you all for being here. Thanks for the First ID for picking New Orleans as your home for this week. We hope you guys come back soon again, and have a great and safe night and weekend.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks again, Mike. Took too long on some of my answers, but I think